July 14, 1944. A dirt road 3 miles southeast of Saint-Lô, Normandy. Sat in the driver's position of his M4A1 Sherman tank, staring at yet another impenetrable hedgerow. His hands rested on the steering levers, but his mind wrestled with a problem that had killed more American tankers in 6 weeks than German armor had managed in 6 months of fighting. The thick Norman earthen wall rose 12 feet in front of him, crowned with centuries-old roots and brambles that had turned every French farm field into a death trap. Behind him, welded to his tank's bow, sat 4 steel prongs cut from German beach obstacles, a modification everyone said violated proper armoured doctrine. But in this moment, facing terrain that conventional tactics could not overcome, Curtis Culin understood something Army planners back in Detroit had not fully grasped. Superior speed meant nothing if you could not move forward at all. What happened next would not just revolutionize armored warfare in the bocage, it would demonstrate that sometimes the perfect solution is not advanced fuel or revolutionary technology, but simple mechanical ingenuity applied by men who understood their enemy, their terrain, and their machines intimately. The story of how American tank crews overcame German tactical advantages through field modifications rather than forbidden fuel tricks begins with an uncomfortable truth. The United States Army discovered in the summer of 1944. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By June of 1944, Allied planners knew the Sherman medium tank inside and out. The M4 Sherman had been in continuous production since February 1942, with nearly 50,000 units manufactured across 11 different factories from Pullman Car Company to Ford Motor Company. The tank used standardized parts, featured reliable mechanical systems, and could be produced faster than any comparable armored vehicle in history. The Sherman's Continental R975 radial engine, adapted from aircraft use, produced 400 horsepower in its C4 variant. The Ford GAA V8 gasoline engine in later models produced 450 horsepower. Both engines ran on 80-octane gasoline, the same fuel used by American trucks, jeeps, and generators throughout the supply chain. This fuel standardization was intentional, not a weakness. Logistical planners understood that supplying multiple fuel types to forward units complicated an already difficult supply situation. Technical Manual TM 9-2800-1, the official Army document covering Sherman engine operations, specified 80-octane gasoline as the standard fuel. This was not low-quality fuel by 1944 standards. German tanks, including the feared Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger, all used gasoline of similar octane ratings, typically 73 to 80 octane. The Soviet T-34 used diesel, but that choice created its own complications in cold weather operations. The Sherman's maximum road speed on level ground was 26 miles per hour for most variants, reaching 30 miles per hour for short bursts in the M4A3 with Ford's V8 engine. The transmission featured a 5-speed manual gearbox with a final drive ratio of 2.84 to 1, mechanically limiting top speed regardless of engine power. You could not make a Sherman significantly faster without completely redesigning the transmission, final drives, and track system. By comparison, the German Panzer IV could reach 25 miles per hour. The Panther managed 34 miles per hour on roads, though mechanical reliability often prevented sustained high-speed movement. The Tiger I, weighing nearly 70 tons, topped out at 23 miles per hour. The Sherman was not slower than its opponents. In many cases, it was faster and far more reliable, but speed on open roads meant nothing in the Norman bocage. The bocage Normand stretched across northwestern France, covering nearly 50 miles of countryside from the invasion beaches inland to Saint-Lô and beyond. This was not typical farmland. Over centuries, Norman farmers had constructed earthen walls averaging 4 feet high, topped with thick hedges, bushes, and trees up to 15 feet tall. These hedgerows surrounded irregularly sized fields, generally no more than 300 feet across. The roots of these ancient plants had created nearly impenetrable barriers. Combat engineers using explosives discovered that even 50-pound charges sometimes failed to breach the thickest hedgerows. The earthen banks were too sturdy, the root systems too interwoven, the hedges too dense for conventional demolition. When Sherman tanks attempted to push over these obstacles, the bow of the tank would ride up the earthen wall, exposing the thin belly armor to German anti-tank fire. A Sherman's underside armor measured only half an inch thick. A Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket, carried by thousands of German infantry soldiers, could penetrate this easily. The tank's 75mm gun, now pointed skyward as the bow lifted, could not engage threats. The crew was blind, vulnerable, and helpless. German defenders understood this terrain intimately. They positioned machine gun nests, anti-tank guns, and individual soldiers with Panzerfausts in perfect ambush positions. Every gap in the hedgerows, every potential crossing point, was pre-registered for artillery and covered by overlapping fields of fire. American infantry advancing across open ground between hedgerows were cut down by machine gun fire. Without tanks to provide suppressing fire and armoured protection, infantry could not advance. Without infantry, to clear German anti-tank teams, tanks could not survive. This was not the warfare American planners had envisioned. Tank doctrine emphasized rapid movement, exploitation of breakthroughs, and deep penetration into enemy rear areas. The Sherman had been designed for exactly this type of mobile warfare. It was lighter than German heavy tanks, specifically to improve strategic mobility. It could be transported by standard landing craft, could cross most bridges without special reinforcement, and could traverse soft ground that would bog down heavier vehicles. But in the bocage, none of these advantages mattered. Mobility was irrelevant when you could not move forward without being destroyed. The 747th Tank Battalion, supporting the 29th Infantry Division, faced this problem first. Combat engineers from the 121st Combat Engineer Battalion placed 24-pound explosive charges near hedgerows to blow gaps for vehicles and infantry. The charges proved ineffective. Engineers increased the charge size to 50 pounds. The 50-pound charges worked, but exposed engineers to enemy fire and consumed enormous quantities of explosives. Time was the critical factor. Placing and detonating a 50-pound charge took precious minutes. The explosion alerted every German soldier within earshot. By the time the gap was blown and cleared, German defenders had repositioned to cover the new opening with machine gun and anti-tank fire. The advantage of surprise, critical in any assault, was lost completely. American casualties in the bocage reached catastrophic levels. The 3rd Armoured Division entered combat in Normandy with 232 M4 Sherman tanks. During the European campaign, the division had 648 Sherman tanks completely destroyed in combat, and another 700 knocked out, repaired, and returned to action. This represented a loss rate of 580%. Tank crews were being killed faster than replacement crews could be trained and shipped to France. The Germans called it Totaler Krieg, total war. Every hedgerow became a fortress. Every field became a killing ground. German soldiers with years of combat experience on the Eastern Front knew how to use terrain for maximum defensive advantage. They did not need heavy armor to stop American advances. The terrain itself became their greatest weapon. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st United States Army, recognized the crisis. On July 2, 1944, he wrote in his diary that the bocage was eating his army alive. Infantry divisions were being ground down in brutal close-quarters fighting. Tank battalions were losing vehicles and crews without achieving meaningful advances. The planned breakout operation, code-named Cobra, required rapid armoured exploitation. Without solving the hedgerow problem, Cobra would fail before it began. American soldiers, with characteristic mechanical ingenuity, began experimenting with field modifications. The typical American soldier in 1944 was more familiar with modern machinery than his German counterpart. The United States had entered the war as an industrial powerhouse with widespread automobile ownership and mechanical education. Many soldiers had worked as mechanics, machinists, or factory workers before induction. They understood engines, transmissions, welding, and improvised repair. This mechanical familiarity created a culture of field modification that German forces, still heavily dependent on horse-drawn transport, could not match. American tank crews did not wait for official solutions from ordnance departments. They identified problems and developed solutions using available materials and their own technical skills. Several units developed hedgerow breaching devices independently during late June and early July 1944. The 747th Tank Battalion created crude steel prongs, welded to tank bows. These devices worked, but were heavy and poorly balanced. Other units tried bulldozer blades, but too few dozer tanks existed in France to make a significant impact. Combat engineers continued experimenting with explosives, but the fundamental problems of time, noise, and exposed personnel remained. Then Sergeant Curtis Culin Jr, serving with the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron of the 2nd Armoured Division, observed something every other soldier had seen but failed to recognize as a solution. The Normandy beaches, where Allied forces had landed 6 weeks earlier, were littered with thousands of German beach obstacles. These were the Czech hedgehows, steel anti-tank barriers constructed from 3 angled beams welded together. The Germans had emplaced these obstacles by the thousands as part of the Atlantic Wall defences. After D-Day, they sat abandoned on the beaches, scrap metal that nobody wanted. Culin realized this scrap metal was exactly what American tank crews needed. The steel beams from Czech hedgehows, if cut to appropriate lengths and welded to a Sherman's bow in a specific configuration, could function as hedgerow-breaking tusks. The steel would pierce the earthen bank and hold the tank's bow down while the tracks maintained traction. The tank could push through the hedgerow without exposing its vulnerable belly armour. On July 7th, Culin sketched his design and showed it to his company commander. The commander immediately recognised the potential. Within days, a demonstration was arranged. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley watched as a test Sherman, fitted with Culin's 4-pronged steel device, accelerated toward a hedgerow at 10 miles per hour. The tusks bored into the earthen wall, the tank's belly stayed low, and the Sherman crashed through in seconds, emerging on the other side fully combat-capable. Bradley understood immediately that he was witnessing a tactical revolution. He ordered Colonel John Madaris of the United States Army Ordnance Department back to the United Kingdom to modify tanks before shipment to France. He arranged for arc welding equipment and trained crews to be flown to Normandy immediately. He directed that Czech hedgehog steel be salvaged from all invasion beaches and transported to forward maintenance units. The 52nd Ordnance Group received orders to mass-produce what became known as the Culin Rhino device, or Culin hedgerow cutter. Between July 14th and July 25th, 1944, maintenance teams created over 500 Culin devices. By the launch of Operation Cobra on July 25th, approximately 60% of 1st Army M4 Sherman tanks were equipped with hedgerow-breaking tusks. This was not a fuel modification. This was not an engine upgrade. This was simple steel, properly configured, welded to the bow of a tank. The modification did not make Shermans faster. It made them mobile again. It restored the fundamental advantage American armor doctrine required: the ability to move forward under fire. The Culin device weighed approximately 300 pounds, a negligible addition to a 33-ton tank. It did not affect maximum speed, turning radius, or mechanical reliability. What it did affect was tactical capability. A Sherman equipped with rhino tusks could breach a hedgerow in seconds without engineer support, without exposing vulnerable belly armour, without alerting German defenders with explosive charges. Infantry could follow immediately behind, using the tank as mobile cover. The element of surprise could be maintained. But the Rhino device, revolutionary as it was, addressed only part of the problem American tank crews faced in Normandy. The modification allowed Shermans to move through hedgerows, but it did not solve the fundamental question that haunted every American tanker from D-Day onward. Could a Sherman survive against German heavy armour in direct combat? This question became urgent as Operation Cobra approached. Intelligence reports indicated strong German armoured formations positioned south of Saint-Lô. The 2nd Panzer Division, 5th Panzer Division, and Panzer Lehr Division all operated in the American sector. These divisions fielded Panzer IV medium tanks, Panther heavy tanks, and small numbers of the dreaded Tiger heavy tank. American tankers had been told their Shermans were adequate for the mission. The 75mm M3 gun, standard armament on most Shermans in Normandy, could penetrate the side and rear armour of any German tank at combat ranges. The armour-piercing M61 round, fired at 2,600 feet per second, would defeat 80mm of armour at 500 yards, more than enough to penetrate a Panzer IV or even a Tiger from the flanks. But frontal engagements were a different matter entirely. The Tiger's frontal armour measured 100mm thick. The Panther's sloped frontal armour, 100mm thick at 55 degrees, was nearly impenetrable to the Sherman's 75mm gun. German tankers knew this. They attempted to present their heavily armoured fronts whenever possible. American crews knew this as well. They attempted to manoeuvre for flank shots, but manoeuvring required space, visibility, and time, commodities the bocage did not provide. The myth emerged during this period that Sherman crews used forbidden fuel modifications to gain tactical advantages. The story, repeated in various forms over the decades, claimed that desperate American mechanics siphoned high-octane aviation gasoline from Air Force stocks and secretly fueled Sherman engines for dramatically increased performance. Some versions claimed this tripled Sherman speed, allowing them to outrun German tanks and maneuver for killing shots before Panthers or Tigers could react. This story is false. High-octane aviation, gasoline, typically 100 to 130 octane, was designed for aircraft engines with high compression ratios and superchargers. The Sherman's Continental R975 radial engine had a compression ratio of only 5.7 to 1. The Ford GAA V8 had a compression ratio of 7.5 to 1. These were low compression engines optimized for reliability, not maximum power output. Running high-octane fuel in a low-compression engine provides no performance benefit whatsoever. Octane rating measures a fuel's resistance to premature detonation under compression, preventing engine knock in high-compression engines. A low-compression engine cannot generate sufficient cylinder pressure to benefit from high-octane fuel. The engine would run exactly the same on 80-octane or 130-octane fuel. More critically, aviation gasoline was severely restricted. Every gallon was accounted for, allocated to specific aircraft, tracked through rigid supply chains. Air Force ground crews would not, and could not, provide aviation fuel to tank crews. The security measures surrounding aviation fuel stocks made unauthorized access nearly impossible. The story of forbidden fuel modifications is a myth, likely born from misunderstanding of how internal combustion engines actually function. What was not a myth was American ingenuity in the field. While fuel modifications were impossible and useless, mechanical modifications proved devastatingly effective. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The real advantage American tank crews discovered in Normandy had nothing to do with fuel, and everything to do with understanding their machines, their enemies, and the fundamental mathematics of armoured warfare. On July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra commenced with a massive aerial bombardment. Over 1,500 heavy bombers and 305th, 80 fighter bombers dropped nearly 4,000 tons of bombs on German positions south of Saint-Lô. The bombardment was supposed to pulverize German defenses, creating a corridor for rapid armoured exploitation. The bombing was devastating, but not in the way planners intended. Some bombs fell short, killing 111 American soldiers, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theatre. The bombardment churned the soil, creating enormous craters and destroying roads. This complicated the planned rapid advance, but it also disrupted German defensive positions and communications. At 1400 hours, 8 divisions of the 1st United States Army began their attack. Leading the assault were Sherman tanks of the 2nd Armored Division and 3rd Armored Division, many now equipped with Culin Rhino devices. The tanks that had been trapped by hedgerows 6 weeks earlier could now crash through terrain that had previously stopped them cold. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Sherman tanks, no longer forced to use predictable gaps in hedgerows, could choose their own routes of advance. They burst through hedgerows at unexpected points, catching German defenders positioned to cover traditional approaches. Infantry followed directly behind the tanks, protected by 33 tons of armor moving at 10 to 15 miles per hour through previously impenetrable terrain. The 2nd Armored Division, with approximately 70% of its tanks equipped with Rhino devices, advanced over 6 miles in 2 days. This was revolutionary compared to the grinding, bloody advances measured in hundreds of yards that had characterized the previous 6 weeks of bocage fighting. The Culin device had restored mobility to American armor, and with mobility came the ability to exploit German weaknesses. But mobility alone did not solve the problem of German heavy armor. On July 27th, elements of the 3rd Armored Division encountered Panther tanks from Panzer Lehr Division near the village of St. Gilles. This engagement would test whether American armor doctrine could overcome German technical superiority. The Panther tank represented the pinnacle of German medium tank design. Introduced in 1943 after encounters with Soviet T-34 tanks shocked German tankers, the Panther featured a powerful 75mm KWK 42L70 gun with a muzzle velocity of 3,100 feet per second. This gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Panther's sloped frontal armor, effectively 185mm thick when accounting for slope, could not be penetrated by the Sherman's 75mm gun at any practical combat range. American tank commanders understood these numbers. They had been briefed on Panther capabilities. Many had already witnessed Shermans, destroyed by long-range Panther fire. The question was not whether the Panther was technically superior. The question was whether technical superiority guaranteed tactical victory. The answer, discovered through bitter experience, was no. American tank doctrine emphasized several principles that German armor doctrine did not prioritize to the same degree. First, American tanks operated in coordinated groups, typically platoons of 5 tanks or troops of 4 tanks, including 1 Sherman Firefly in British formations. German tanks, particularly elite heavy tank battalions, often operated individually or in pairs, trusting armor and firepower to overcome numerical disadvantages. Second, American doctrine integrated combined arms at the lowest tactical levels. A Sherman platoon expected immediate support from infantry, artillery, and increasingly by summer 1944, tactical air support. German armored formations operated with combined arms support, but communication and coordination were often disrupted by Allied air superiority and artillery fire. Third, American tanks emphasized mechanical reliability over maximum performance. The Sherman was designed for ease of maintenance, used standardized parts, and could be repaired quickly in field conditions. The Panther, despite its impressive specifications, suffered chronic mechanical problems. Transmission failures were common. Final drive failures occurred frequently. Engine fires plagued early production models. A Panther, with superior armor and firepower, was tactically worthless if it broke down before reaching combat. At Saint-Gilles, these doctrinal differences determined the outcome. 3 Panthers from Panzer Lehr Division occupied hull-down positions on a slight ridge, presenting only their heavily armored turrets to approaching American forces. The Panthers engaged Sherman tanks from the 3rd Armored Division at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. 2 Shermans were destroyed immediately, turrets blown off by the tremendous kinetic energy of Panther armor-piercing rounds. American tank commanders did not attempt to engage the Panthers frontally. Instead, they called for artillery support while maneuvering their tanks under cover. M7, Priest self-propelled howitzers, organic to the Armored Division, began dropping 105mm high-explosive shells on and around the Panther positions. The artillery did not penetrate the Panther's armor, but it forced the German crews to button up, closing all hatches and limiting visibility to narrow periscope views. While artillery kept the Panthers occupied, a platoon of Shermans used the Rhino devices to crash through hedgerows to the Panther's left flank. German tank doctrine emphasized frontal armor and firepower, but the Panther's side armor was only 40 to 50mm thick. At ranges under 500 yards, The Sherman's 75mm gun could easily penetrate this. The flanking Shermans achieved complete surprise. The Panthers, focused on the threat to their front and partially blinded by artillery fire and dust, did not detect the flanking movement until the first Sherman opened fire at 300 yards. The armor-piercing round struck the lead Panther's turret side, penetrated, and caused an ammunition explosion. The second Panther attempted to traverse its turret toward the new threat, but Sherman turrets rotated faster than Panther turrets, a deliberate design choice that proved critical in close-range engagements. 2 more 75mm rounds struck the Panther's side before it could complete its turret traverse. Both rounds penetrated. The Panther caught fire. The third Panther, recognizing the tactical situation had become untenable, reversed rapidly and withdrew. This was sound tactical judgment. A disabled Panther could be recovered and repaired if the crew escaped. A destroyed Panther, with its dead crew, benefited no one. German tank crews learned quickly that tactical withdrawal was often wiser than fighting to destruction. The engagement at Saint-Gilles lasted approximately 12 minutes. American losses: 2 Sherman tanks destroyed, 3 crew members killed, 2 wounded. German losses: 2 Panther tanks destroyed or abandoned, estimated 10 crew members killed or captured. This was not the 5-to-1 kill ratio that German propaganda claimed for Panther versus Sherman engagements. This was a ratio favoring the numerically superior, tactically flexible, combined arms approach over technically superior but isolated armor. Similar engagements occurred throughout Operation Cobra and the subsequent breakout from Normandy. American armor doctrine, which had been criticized as inadequate when facing German heavy tanks, proved devastatingly effective when applied properly. Shermans did not attempt to outgun Panthers or Tigers. They outmaneuvered them, outnumbered them, and destroyed them through coordinated combined arms action. The mythology surrounding Sherman performance often focuses on the wrong variables. Speed, armor, thickness, and gun penetration are important specifications, but they do not determine battlefield outcomes in isolation. What matters is the complete system: the tank, its crew, its supporting elements, its doctrine, and critically, its reliability. By late July 1944, German armored formations in Normandy were collapsing not because American tanks were faster or better armed, but because German tanks could not be kept running. The Panther's transmission, designed to handle a tank weighing 45 tons, was subjected to combat conditions far harsher than test conditions. Transmissions failed catastrophically. Final drives, the gears connecting the engine to the drive sprockets, cracked under stress. German repair facilities, targeted relentlessly by Allied bombers, could not produce replacement parts fast enough. German tank ace Otto Carius, who destroyed over 150 tanks during the war, wrote in his memoir that mechanical reliability mattered more than any other factor. A Tiger tank with perfect armor and a devastating 88mm gun was useless if it could not reach the battlefield. Carius described watching Panthers break down during road marches, their crews forced to abandon vehicles that had never fired a shot in anger. American Shermans, by contrast, achieved remarkable mechanical reliability. The Continental radial engine, despite being adapted from aircraft use, proved durable under sustained operation. The Ford GAA V8 was even better, combining high power output with exceptional reliability. The transmission, while limiting top speed, was robust and rarely failed. The suspension, using vertical volute spring systems, could absorb tremendous punishment and continue functioning. Field maintenance records from the 3rd Armored Division show that Sherman operational readiness rates in Normandy exceeded 80% even during intense combat operations. Panther operational readiness rates in the same period rarely exceeded 60%, often dropping below 40% when spare parts were unavailable. This meant that even if the Panther was theoretically superior in specifications, American units consistently fielded more operational tanks than German units of equivalent size. The breakthrough achieved during Operation Cobra led directly to the encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket. American armor, mobile again thanks to simple steel tusks welded to tank bows, exploited the breakthrough and raced toward Argentan. British and Canadian forces pushed south from Caen toward Falaise. Between these converging forces, tens of thousands of German soldiers and hundreds of German tanks were trapped. The Falaise pocket became a killing ground. German forces, attempting to escape, were subjected to continuous air attack and artillery fire. Panther and Tiger, tanks, unable to maneuver effectively on congested roads, were abandoned when they ran out of fuel or suffered mechanical breakdowns. Luftwaffe support, which might have provided air cover, was virtually non-existent. Allied fighter bombers roamed at will, destroying vehicles and infantry formations with rockets, bombs, and cannon fire. By August 21, 1944, the Falaise pocket had been closed. Approximately 50,000 German soldiers were captured. An estimated 10,000 to 15,000 were killed. Material losses included approximately 500 tanks and assault guns, hundreds of artillery pieces, and thousands of vehicles. This represented the destruction of effective German combat power in Normandy. The formations that escaped were shadows of their former strength, lacking equipment, personnel, and cohesion. The myth of the forbidden fuel trick persisted in part because soldiers wanted to believe there was a secret advantage, some special modification that explained American success. The truth was less dramatic but more impressive. American success came from industrial capacity, logistical excellence, mechanical reliability, tactical flexibility, and the willingness of individual soldiers to identify problems and develop solutions. Curtis Culin's Rhino device exemplified this approach. He did not have advanced training in engineering. He was a 29-year-old sergeant from Cranford, New Jersey, who had worked various jobs before the war. What he had was mechanical common sense, the ability to observe a problem clearly, and the willingness to propose a solution even though he had no authority to implement design changes officially. The United States Army, to its credit, recognized good ideas regardless of source. General Bradley could have dismissed Culin's device as an unauthorized field modification. Instead, he immediately ordered mass production. This willingness to adopt good ideas from any source, combined with the industrial capacity to implement those ideas rapidly, gave American forces advantages no amount of high-octane fuel could provide. The Sherman tank's real performance advantage was not speed, but adaptability. The basic M4 chassis could mount different engines, different guns, different armor configurations, and dozens of specialized modifications. Sherman hulls were converted into tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, armored recovery vehicles, mine flails, flamethrower tanks, and amphibious DD tanks. This versatility came from the original design philosophy: create a reliable, producible platform that could be modified for different roles. German tanks, particularly the Panther and Tiger, were optimized for specific roles and difficult to modify. The Tiger was a heavy breakthrough tank, designed to destroy enemy armor at long range. It did this exceptionally well when it was operational, properly supported, and used according to its design parameters. But it could not be easily adapted for other roles. It was too heavy for many bridges, too wide for many roads, too fuel-hungry for extended operations, and too mechanically complex for field repairs. This inflexibility created vulnerability. As the war progressed and German resources dwindled, the inability to adapt became fatal. German industry produced impressive tanks, but could not produce them in sufficient numbers or keep them operational in the field. American industry produced adequate tanks in overwhelming numbers and kept them running regardless of conditions. The final irony of the Sherman versus German heavy armor debate is that American forces rarely encountered Tigers. Post-war analysis of combat reports from 1st United States Army indicates only 3 confirmed engagements between American Shermans and Tiger tanks during the entire Northwest Europe campaign. The first encounter occurred during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The second involved Tigers being loaded onto railroad cars, hardly a fair fight. The third engagement's details remain disputed. Panthers were more common, but still relatively rare. At peak strength in September 1944, German forces in the West fielded approximately 2,300 operational Panthers. By comparison, the United States fielded approximately 2,000 Sherman tanks per Army group, with multiple Army groups operating simultaneously. The numerical advantage was overwhelming. The tank American Shermans most commonly fought was the Panzer IV, Germany's most numerous tank with approximately 9,000 produced. The Panzer IV had been upgraded continuously throughout the war, receiving better armor and more powerful guns. By 1944, late-model Panzer IVs mounted the 75mm KWK-40 gun, with performance roughly comparable to the Sherman's 75mm M3 gun. Against Panzer IVs, Shermans were evenly matched, or slightly, superior. The Sherman's gyrostabilizer, which helped maintain aim while moving, gave American gunners an advantage in meeting engagements. The Sherman's faster turret traverse allowed American crews to acquire targets more quickly. The Sherman's superior reliability meant more American tanks were available for each engagement. A study conducted by the United States Army Ballistic Research Laboratory in 1946 examined 30 armor versus armor engagements fought by 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions during 1946-44. The study found that Shermans achieved a 3.6 to 1 kill ratio against Panthers. This ratio accounts for all factors: numerical superiority, tactical surprise, combined arms support, and German mechanical failures. But it decisively refutes the myth that Panthers dominated Sherman tanks in combat. The Sherman's ultimate vindication came not in 1944, but in decades following the war. Surplus Shermans were sold to dozens of nations and served in combat through the 1970s. Israel extensively modified Shermans, installing more powerful engines, better guns, and improved armor. These Super Shermans fought successfully against Soviet-supplied T-54 and T-55 tanks during the Six-Day War in 1967 and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The fact that Shermans remained viable combat vehicles 30 years after their design was finalized speaks to the soundness of the original engineering. The Sherman was not perfect. Its armor was inadequate against late-war German anti-tank weapons. Its 75mm gun was obsolete by 1944 standards. But the basic platform was solid enough to accept improvements, modifications, and upgrades that extended its service life far beyond original expectations. Curtis Culin received the Legion of Merit for his hedgerow cutter invention. He continued serving until November 1944, when he lost a leg to a landmine in the Hurtgen forest. After the war, he returned to the United States and worked as a salesman for Shenley Industries, a liquor distributor. He rarely spoke about his invention, uncomfortable with the attention and publicity. In his final address as President of the United States on January 10, 1961, Dwight Eisenhower spoke to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. He recounted the story of Sergeant Culin and the Rhino device, using it as an example of how individual initiative and ingenuity could solve problems that baffled military bureaucracies. Eisenhower emphasized that the biggest and happiest group in all the Allied armies, the night after Bradley approved the device, were those soldiers who knew this simple modification would save their lives. The story of the Sherman tank in World War II is not a story of forbidden fuel or secret modifications. It is a story of adequate equipment, used well, maintained properly, and adapted continuously. It is a story of industrial capacity, overwhelming technical sophistication. It is a story of soldiers who understood that reliability mattered more than specifications, that tactics mattered more than technology, and that simple solutions often worked better than complex ones. The myth of Sherman inferiority persists because myths are more compelling than reality. The image of underdog American tankers fighting superior German armor appeals to our love of underdogs. The idea that clever mechanics used forbidden fuel to level the playing field makes for a good story, but the reality is more impressive than any myth. American tankers won not because they cheated, not because they used forbidden modifications, and not because they had secret advantages. They won because they were better supplied, better supported, more numerous, and more adaptable than their opponents. They won because their tanks, while not the most powerful or best armored, were reliable enough to reach the battlefield, durable enough to survive the battle, and simple enough to be repaired afterward. The Sherman tank's legacy is not found in its specifications, but in its accomplishments. It carried American forces from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany. It served in every theatre of World War II, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific. It remained in service with Allied nations for decades after the war ended. It proved that competent engineering, applied practically and produced abundantly, defeats theoretical perfection every time. On the morning of July 14, 1944, Curtis Culin sat in his Sherman tank, facing an impenetrable hedgerow. He did not have forbidden fuel. He did not have advanced technology. He had 4 steel prongs welded to his tank's bow, cut from German beach obstacles, configured through trial and error to solve a specific problem. When he accelerated that Sherman toward the hedgerow at 10 miles per hour, when those steel tusks bit into the earthen bank, when his tank crashed through into the field beyond, he proved something more valuable than any performance modification could provide. He proved that American soldiers understood their tools, their mission, and their enemy well enough to improvise solutions that professional engineers had missed. The perfect solution did not require perfect fuel. It required simple steel, practical thinking, and the courage to try something new. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.